Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Len Lonzi. I'm the Managing Director of the Preccelerator program, a program of a law firm here in Los Angeles, Stubbs, Alderton, and Markleese. We've been operating since 2013. We have had 49 companies come through our accelerator program over the years. And I see a couple of our current companies on board, a couple of applicants on board, and it's nice to have you all. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce to you one of our mentors who's recently back in town after a short hiatus, Dr. Frumi Barr. Frumi is a strategic advisor and growth expert. She's a serial entrepreneur, having started and run 5 entrepreneurial adventures, and now follows her passion for equipping founders and their teams with tools to scale up safely. She lives her why, her purpose and cause, daily, creating a safe environment for leaders and their teams to talk about tough issues that matter most to build a profitable and sustainable organization. Dr. Frumi always begins with culture, the competitive advantage of any company, and building ridiculously successful businesses is what it's all about. So that's what's written about her. I will tell you that she is a personable, engaging, interesting person that beyond what you're going to hear from her today, she is somebody you should get to know. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Frumi Barr. Frumi?
Well, hi, everybody. I'm excited to be here today. I'm going to share just a couple of slides, and I'm going to put what I'm going to talk about actually in the chat. So you don't have to worry about remembering what I'm going to talk about. But I want this to be kind of like a low-tech conversation, so you can ask questions, put them in the chat. Len's going to let me know when there's a question there. And feel free to interrupt so that you get the most out of this. So I'm going to start off just by sharing my screen very quickly. So strategy is a success imperative. And it's important not to just work in your business, but on it. And so here's why. Just a second, if I can move my mouse over here, it would be helpful. So there's 28 million firms in the US, and we always hear about all the big ones. You know, we see all these multiple billions of valuation for Facebook and Amazon and Apple, etc. But the truth is that 96% of companies are under $1 million. We lose track of that. And there's only, which means, of course, there's only 4% of companies that are over $1 million. There's only 17,000 companies that are over 50 million. And yet when so many startups do their early projections, everybody envisions themselves to be worth 100 million, 200 million, etc. There's a long way to go from startup to get there. And this kind of really highlights that. I remember when I first saw it, I was just astounded how few companies there were that were over 50 million. And in between every single layer of growth, there's a valley of death. And what that means is, in the valley of death is the time when companies need to be really strategic and think about their processes as well as their people. Because whoever you hire initially, you might give your brother-in-law the opportunity to be a CFO, but that doesn't mean that your brother-in-law is the best person when you get to 10 million. So it's really critical to think of those things even when you're starting. And often this conversation about growth, people see it more from middle market companies, but it's my belief that if you know where you're going, you'll put the safeguards in place early on so that you grow safely. So that's my intention today, is to share, the 10 commandments of strategy. So this is what I'll be putting in the chat as soon as I stop sharing. One by one, know your why, share your core values, etc. Create words you own, stand by your brand, what you promise, know your sandbox, say it succinctly in a one-phrase strategy, create 3 to 5 differentiating activities, discover your X factor, decide your profit per X and BHAG, and develop your core competencies. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Anybody have any questions about this lovely chart or anything that I've said so far? So let me just put this in the chat. All right, Now you've got that in the chat, so you know what I'm going to be talking about. So let's start with knowing your why. When Lynn introduced me, you heard my why, to create a safe place to discuss what matters most. How many of you know who Simon Sinek is? Hands? Okay. If you don't know who Simon Sinek is, then look him up. He has one of the most viewed TED Talks, and it's all about start with why. When people know what you stand for, they're more likely to be inspired by you and more likely to even connect with you. Your why is your purpose for existing. It underlines everything you do, and it's much bigger than just making money. So one of the companies where I'm a co-founder is called Scholar. Scholar stands for Smart Collar. It's essentially an Apple Watch for animals. Everything from monitoring the health of animals, a marketplace, knowing where they are if you're out hiking. And when we first started Scholar, the first thing we did was understand why we were there, which is shaping the future of animal care. One sentence. And everything we do, we focus in on our why, and it helps us get up every morning. Because as you know, it's not always easy to be an entrepreneur. So you have to know why you're getting up every morning. And in fact, start your introductions with your why. If you want someone specific to talk to in a company, one of my clients once said, I'm not getting much traction. I keep sending emails to all these people. I'm not hearing from them. I said, why don't you share why you're doing this? Inspire them. Let them know why you're passionate about this. You might not be the best at one specific thing, but if you're passionate about it, you're likely to be better than the average person. So start with your why. And sure enough, you got the meeting that you wanted, which is very exciting. So it's also really important if you're the leader of a company to share your why, because you want to attract people who believe what you believe. And if people aren't in sync with your purpose, chances are you're going to have a revolving door. So it's a really good way to recruit people. Many people don't even know what their why is. So my suggestion to the people who don't know their why is to live every day on purpose. So have a purpose every single day. So the second thing on the list is to share your core values. So core values are the essence of your culture. For example, there's a company in Canada. This is one of my very favorite core values because I think you'll all understand this one. The core value is make mama proud. Now they could have said have integrity, but we know other companies like Enron in the day had integrity on their wall in their lobby, and they sure didn't have any. So it's important not only to just say make mama proud, but what does that mean to you? So a core value should also have a description, because when you're the leader of a company, you know clearly why you put that on the list. But 50 employees later, or even 10 employees later, what does it really mean? And how do you use your core values? It's not just about establishing them once. It's about really repeating them. In all hands meetings, core values should be repeated every single time. Every single meeting we have at Scholar every Monday with the all hands meeting, we actually share each of us shares a core value. Sometimes we put a focus on the core values. So that person will describe what it really means to them. And if anyone comes late to a meeting, they have to tell them all. So they really have to memorize them. So that's what core values are all about. And
Frumi, if I can interrupt. So for instance, a core value of mine is service, to be of service. And for me, that means helping people meet their needs so we can create a better world. And that would be an example of my core value. Wonderful.
And you know what? When someone joins a company, they might not have the identical core values, but they have to be aligned with the core values. Because if they're not aligned, they're not going to stick. So one of my core values, and the core value at Scholar, is family first, both human and furry. And what that means is, if my dog is, having a tough time here, throwing up or something, I will say to everyone, I have to take care of Enzo. And everybody gets it, and it's okay. In some companies, people are afraid to even take a day off for a funeral because they're afraid that something's going to happen. And that's not okay. So it's really important not only to know your core values, but to share them, keep them alive. So the third one, and by all means, anybody, just raise your hand or use the reaction button in the bottom to raise your hand. Marshall, you have a question?
It wasn't necessarily a question, but a comment around core values.
Sure.
I was a previous job, I was COO of a financial firm, and we put together our core values and our strategic outlook and plan. And one thing I just wanted to comment on was make sure the partners or everyone has the same definition of the core values. Where we ran into an issue was, just for example, your integrity. It was the executive team, there was 4 of us, and one person had an extremely different definition of what integrity meant. And so that just added a lot of friction between us. And when we came into kind of problems or issues, we would pull up our values and be like, let's exercise integrity. And we got stuck. One person had said we are, the other person wasn't. So just being able to talk about that and define it in our own ways is very important.
That's why it's not just a heading, but it's actually a little paragraph that describes what you mean by it. I was doing a retreat with a group of 7 CEOs. They were all CEOs before, and they all came into one company. They were all very powerful guys. And one of them said, thoughtfulness. And everybody kind of looked at him and said, thoughtfulness? So the key was, what do you mean by thoughtfulness? And once he described what he meant, everybody got it. So, and words get us in trouble in so many different ways. You say a wrong word in a meeting and everybody can pounce on you, and that's not even what you meant. So it's just fascinating. I always ask people, what do you mean by that? Because it's really a way to have better communication. So thank you for that, Marshall. That was really helpful. So the third one in this 10 Commandments of Strategy is create words you own. What are the words that matter? What are the words that people think about when they start to search for your product or services? And so one word we all know is Google. It's now a verb. Google it, right? Does anybody do anything? How many times a day do you Google something? A lot. I even Google when I'm watching Netflix at night, so I know what's happening next in one of the series I'm watching. So we all know what Google means. So pick a niche, own the niche, and own the words in that niche so that your core customers can find you. That's kind of an easy one. The next one is stand by your brand guarantee, what you promise. So what are your 3 brand promises? Most companies have 3. And the key is to be able to describe it quantitatively so that you can actually measure it. And so let me give you an example of a brand promise. Southwest Airlines promises lots of fun, low fares, lots of flights, right? We all know that about them. And they stick to their promise. That's their brand promise guarantee. Another company that I heard of once was a granite company. And what they said was, if you don't get a perfect piece of granite, let's say for your kitchen counters, then let us know and we will allow you to tell us what you think it's worth. So let's say they invoiced that piece of granite for $1,000. If it came with a slight damage, person would take a picture of it, and maybe they'd only pay $600. So they were willing to stand by their brand promise that you get a perfect piece of granite. That's how a brand promise works. You have to be willing to take a hit financially to protect your promise. Next is know your sandbox. Your sandbox is where you play. Who are your core customers? What are they interested in? Where are they? And these are the people that you can earn the most profit with over time. So once you know specifically who they are, then it's easier to know where to find them. The sandbox could be not only a niche, but it could also be a geo. It could be that you want your products or services to expand to England. So know where they are, and put that into your plan. This is one of my favorite. The next one is say it succinctly in a one-phrase strategy. So one-phrase strategy for Southwest Airlines, does anybody know what that is? Anybody?
One phrase, a one-phrase strategy?
Strategy for Southwest Airlines.
Oh, for Southwest in particular.
Yes. Should I help?
Safety?
No, wheels up.
Wheels up, okay.
So what that means, it's a very simple one-phrase strategy. Everybody in the organization knows it. And what makes it so important is that based on that one-phrase strategy, they make a lot of decisions. So for example, a stewardess came to, or I guess we call them a flight attendant now, a flight attendant came to leadership and said, why don't we serve salads instead of just pretzels and no more peanuts even, you know, with those little goldfish? Why don't we do that? And the reason was, does anybody know what the reason was? What would that do to Wheels Up? It would take time.
Right. So
Now we have to wait for the food truck to come and load it up into the airplane. So everything they do and everything that decision they make, they say, how does this fit our strategy? So that's, now the other thing that they do, this is where the 3 to 5 differentiating activities come from, is underpinning that one phrase strategy is a series of activities. So for Southwest Airlines again, has anybody noticed that all the airplanes are the same? They only use 737s. And that's what differentiates them from the other airlines. And that allows them to get Wheels Up quickly. For one thing, all the mechanics only need parts for 737s. They don't have to worry about, now this is a 747, this is what, you know, a different airplane. Also, the flight crew cleans the airplane. So they start at the back of the plane and they go forward and they clean everything, again, because it's a differentiating activity. Look at how with Southwest Airlines, we have to line up into A, B, and C groups. These are all the things that are their differentiating activities that allow them to get Wheels Up. It's a beautiful thing. Any questions, comments? Anybody do that in their business? Anybody have a one-phrase strategy they want to share? And some differentiating activities?
I kind of
So I know,
Oh, go ahead, Greg.
for example, the engineering college at UCLA, their phrase is engineer change. It's their mission.
Okay, what do they mean by that? Do you know?
I think it's the goal to try to improve and empower the world by using their engineering talents to make things better, different, you know, by, I'm not sure the definition of what better or different might mean, but it's basically try to use their engineering capabilities to make changes to the world that are good for us.
I wonder how that impacts their decision making, but that's just a curiosity of mine, I suppose. So any other comments?
The question I have is, how do you come to that? You know, that to distill it down to a one-word strategy, there's got to be a process to do that. And that may be a whole other workshop, but is it something that is done, I would imagine, with a lot of thought and process to come to that position of, you know, Wheels Up, or, you know, here it could be entrepreneurs first, or.
So the way we come to that, I'm part of the Scale Up community, but I'm also very familiar with the EOS, Entrepreneurs Operating System community, and I've added my own secret sauce to it. But essentially, it's working on separating strategic thinking from execution planning. So the strategic thinking is what I'm sharing with you, but then there's the whole execution planning side of it. And what we end up with is a one-page execution plan. So everybody's always encouraged to put together a business plan. And what's in a business plan? We all know, right? It's what's the management team, who's the management team, what's the use of funds, who's the competition. Those are all the traditional things that are in a business plan. But what people often forget is that you also need an execution plan. Because how are you going to accomplish that? What are the disciplines that you're going to put in place in your organization to make sure that you're going to be able to execute on your business plan? So what goes into this plan in the strategic thinking arena are the core values, your why, your brand promise, your differentiating activities, all those things that I mentioned. Those are all the strategic thinking part of this execution plan. Then in the execution plan, that's where we do some really interesting stuff. That's where we talk about what's the 3 to 5 year plan. What is this strategy? And it doesn't happen overnight. It takes some kind of trying it out, trying it on for size, coming back, doing it again next quarter. And it might take a whole year to get it down into that one sentence. But if you don't devote time to your strategic thinking, you won't get there. It just happens, one day at a time. So what else goes into that execution planning? After the 3 to 5 year plan, where you have your priorities and the competencies that you have to develop in order to reach your goals, then that gets broken down further into a 1 year plan. What are you going to accomplish this year? What are the processes you have to put in place? Who are the people that you have to put in place? And what are the accountabilities? Who are the people who are in charge of, let's say, funding? You can't have 4 people in charge of funding. There has to be 1 person accountable and other people who might be responsible for helping that person achieve the funding. And then in the quarterly plan, my methodology is to create 4 12-week years. Because if you can imagine, your Q1 is your first 12-week year. Then you get a week to plan your Q2 or your next 12-week year. And by doing it this way, you end up accomplishing so much more in a year than if you just, so many companies used to do this, especially law firms, go off on a retreat once a year, come up with 25 initiatives. Nothing gets done because 25 are too many. You really need 5 main priorities. And then, because you're reviewing this every quarter, every 12 weeks, you can look at each priority and say, what are we doing? Is this still the right priority, or do we need to shift priorities? And then it gets distilled further because you have daily huddles or stand-up meetings, whatever you want to call them. And in those meetings, you talk about, I'm working on this, here's where I'm stuck. In the weekly meeting, you talk about where you're stuck. Let's iron out what the challenges are. And then there's monthly meetings, there's quarterly meetings. I can't say enough when I say I'm often the adult supervision in the room, is because I believe in order to build a sustainable company, you need to put these disciplines in place or you won't get there.
Can I push back a little bit?
Sure, please. Let's do it.
Can you get bogged down in meetings with what you just presented, where the meetings become the issue and not the process?
You know what? You don't get bogged down in meetings because the meetings have a very definite agenda. So let's say a daily stand-up. Daily stand-up, let's say 3 founders. It should only take 5 minutes. Okay. But then, Scholar, for example, we have a weekly founder meeting where we look at the budget, we talk about our priorities, we see where we're at. That takes an hour, okay, every single week. But nothing ever gets nothing falls through the cracks that way. And if you're going to build, I always think in terms of exponential growth. I expect Scholar to grow wildly. My own companies did, and I didn't have any of this in place then. I wish I would have had a me then, because I would have grown more safely and with less headaches. Can't tell you how many nights I lay in bed looking at the ceiling wondering how to pay payroll, But now I just advise people on how to do that, which is much more fun. So the next thing I believe on hold on, let me just get my cheat sheet back here. So the next thing is the X factor. Now the X factor is your 10X advantage. And that's another thing that you just don't develop overnight. It's like the secret sauce that you have to keep looking for. And I'll give you a great example. This is kind of an old example, but it's still an oldie but goodie. There was a CEO of a company called Happy Lawn. And what Happy Lawn did was essentially they were your landscaping people who came and mowed your lawn. And it cost Happy Lawn about $400 to $500 for each new client because they had to go to their house and they had to measure the yard and they had to figure out, there was a swimming pool or maybe there was some, rough way to get the lawnmower around the corners. And so his growth was stagnant at $2 million a year. So he went to one of the scale-up conferences and he started talking to people about this 10X factor. How do you find it? What do you do? So what's new in technology? What's going to help you achieve that? And guess what? It was when Google Maps first came out. So this fellow drove home from Philadelphia to wherever the heck he lived. I just remember the conference was in Philadelphia. And he rewrote his whole business plan. And he used Google Maps. And he was able to grow his company to 8 million and grow. The cost of getting a new client was pretty negligible. That's the 10X factor. So not everybody's going to figure that out in a minute, right? When we started off with Scholar, we started off with this idea that we would have this collar, like a watch, that would measure everything. And it's a full stack open platform, and we had trouble explaining what that was because most investors had no clue what that meant. And we talked about having an app and having data in the cloud. And that was where we started. But you know what happened over the year? We realized that we could provide people like Purina or Hills or any company that catered to animals with the data that they needed in order to find their consumers and sell them what they needed. So we created a marketplace. And now we're able to get information and we're able to offer food and we're able to offer treats for pets. And in the future, we'll be able to monitor cows from farm to fork, for example, or racehorses and understand, their respiratory rates, etc. So that didn't happen overnight. It took us till our 4th year, so forever startup, to figure out what our real value was. And I don't think that's unusual. Anybody have anything they want to share?
It's a quiet group.
Quiet group.
That's okay.
So how would you go about finding your X factor? Well, this is a little hard these days. It's hard and easy at the same time. So at conferences in any industry vertical, there are always certain topics that people talk about all the time. That's the first clue to where everybody has a challenge. So what are they talking about? How can you solve whatever problem they're talking about in your business? And that might be your 10X factor. So that's a really creative way to find it. So it's those roadblocks in your industry that might give you the clue to what that is. Okay, so moving on to deciding your profit per X. What does that mean? So for Southwest again, as we continue I'm so longing to go on a trip that that's why I think I'm talking about Southwest so much. I just want to go somewhere, anywhere. Brian's with me. So is Ryan. I want to go somewhere. Anyway, so the profit per X is for Southwest, planes in the air, every plane that goes up. For United, it was butts in the seat. So now, if you go on a Southwest airplane, I believe, I haven't done it, but there are spaces in the seats. You don't sit jam-packed. But if you go on a United flight, guess what? You're wearing a mask and you're sitting like jammed in with someone else. I'm not going on a United flight. I would pick Southwest anytime because I trust them. And also I know a pilot who told me they're really good at cleaning the airplane and stuff. So that's what profit per X is, whatever it is. Any metric you like, it could be profit, it could be gross margin, but that's what profit per X is. And then also your BHAG. So BHAG is a term that was created by Jim Collins. What it stands for is your big, hairy, audacious goal. Does anybody know the Subway story? Subway food?
Subway food.
Fast food? Okay, so Subway's first BHAG came out of Capstone in college. The CEO of Subway was encouraged to dream big. His dream, 10 Subway stores. Okay, guess what? They surpassed 10 Subway stores. The next BHAG was 32 stores. So does anybody know what their current BHAG is?
3,000.
A 50-cent share per day of every American's wallet.
Wow.
So how many of you travel up and down between, let's say, LA and San Francisco?
On occasion.
I do. You know what? Subways are not at rest stops, but they're at those fuel places now. And that's because how else are they going to do it? Right? They're all over the world. And that was what their BHAG did for them.
Interesting.
And it sounds like it's supposed to be a stretch. And you can change it. But that's the purpose of it. It's a big, hairy, audacious goal. All right. And finally, number 10 on my list of important strategy 10 commandments. So that's your core competencies. And that has 3 attributes. First of all, it's not easy for competitors to imitate. Scholar is the only animal technology company, the only wearable that has a full stack open platform that allows us to have a marketplace. Nobody else. So that is why we think we'll be $1 billion company, but you know, we'll see. I'll still come back here, Lynn, I promise you. Secondly, it can be reused widely for many products and markets, and it must contribute to the benefits the end customer experiences and the value of the product or service to customers. So it's important that your core competencies provide boundaries for also determining what your service offerings are. So you don't just end up with a mountain full of things that you can't succeed on everything. And that's how you also, I would suggest that you find people to recruit. So one thing I didn't mention, which I'd love to share with startups, is start building your virtual bench now. So what I mean by a virtual bench is ask people you know, who are the most talented people that you know that I can meet? You may not need them now, but you will at some point. And when you need them, that's not the time to start scrambling around and looking to hire someone, because you'll end up hiring the wrong person. And I'll give you an example again with Scholar. We moved to Kansas City. That's why Len referred to the fact that I'm back. We moved to Kansas City last year because we pitched at the Animal Health Corridor Investment Forum. Not many people know, but Kansas City is the heart of the Animal Health Corridor, which stretches north and south of Kansas City, and it's where 60% of the world's companies that cater to animal care, animal health, animal products are. So we realized that in order to get investors, we would have to go where the money was, where people cared about animals. So we up and moved to Kansas City, and our first partnership was with Bayer Animal Health, which really allowed us to create our product and launch into the market. And we took advantage of several of the state of Missouri initiatives. And as a result, the governor of Missouri and the mayor of Kansas City did a ribbon cutting for us. So we were all over the news. And then we started to get a ton of people who either had left Sprint or left big companies and wanted to work for Scholar. We're all passionate about animals. Well, okay, so I had 10 people who all wanted to join the company, but we weren't ready for them. So what we did was we put them on a virtual bench. We said, we're not ready for you, but we want to nurture this relationship. Keep in touch. We'll keep in touch with you. And once we were ready to hire, we hired an incredible young man who's our director of e-commerce and another director of partnerships from the virtual bench. So I recommend that highly. And now, Len, questions?
So an observation, and what I love about this talk is it plays in a couple different ways, because as I look at these 10 things, these can apply to you as an individual first, right? And having an individual strategy and how you set your goals and what your life is. And I would hypothesize that having this strategy first and understanding it for yourself is really important before you go into a company and try and do it for a bigger organization that involves other people. So what are your thoughts as it relates to the individual strategy versus the company strategy?
Well, we're each our own brand, right?
Right.
And how we show up is how we demonstrate to the world who we are.
Right.
So it's important to protect your brand. For example, if you go to a meeting and people get to introduce themselves and one person goes on and on and on, are they helping their brand? No. The person who stands up and is really succinct about introducing themselves, they're the person who knows that their brand is important to them. And you're each the CEO of your own life. So it's important to, what's interesting about this, I just gave a talk last week on something that's called the Big Five for life. The 5 things you want to do, see, or experience in your life, so you can say someday at the end of your life, far in the future, that your life was a success. And so many people don't take the time to think about those things and there's a Museum Day video, which I'll send you, Len, and you can share it with the group because it's really powerful. If you can imagine that at the end of your life, someone put up a museum to commemorate how you lived, it would show how you really lived. You might have aspired, you might have said you love family, but you never spend time with family, or that you love to travel, but you never went anywhere. I mean, that would be kind of disappointing, right? And then imagine if someone created this museum with pictures of you sitting at your desk, being aggravated, tearing your hair out, instead of, waltzing through Tuscany or something like that. What would you want to see in a museum? And then at the end, imagine if you are the tour guide for the rest of eternity in your museum. How would you feel? Doesn't that encourage you to be the CEO of your own life?
Yep.
Get what you want out of life, right?
And the same thing for a company, right? You have to have a strategic roadmap. It's not just about building a product. Why are you building that product? What is the why? And really start at the top of your list. And as you go down, and even as I work with startups, this is kind of a process that you go through to understand where they're coming from. And if they're missing pieces of this, they're less apt to be successful.
So I'm going to share one screen. So if anybody wants to reach out to me, ask me questions, feel free to do so. So here's my contact information. And I'll also share with you that's what I used to look like 10 years ago. So that's my book, A CEO's Secret Weapon, How to Accelerate Success. And the story behind the book is that I interviewed 50 CEOs around the world in a time that was really very similar to this. It was the end of 2008, and CEOs had a lot of challenges. They didn't know whether they should keep their money, spend their money, invest their money. They just didn't know. And so I interviewed 50 different CEOs. And as a result of that, I actually got 40 challenges. and I distilled them into 10 chapters. And the secret sauce, so I was a CEO Secret Weapon. I've worked with CEOs for 20 years. But the real secret is to use your why as the engine to overcome all the challenges. And Simon Sinek wrote the foreword to my book. So I'm very proud of the book. It won a prize. Anyway, so that's it. And I'm happy to take questions, to answer questions about your specific businesses if you have them. I promised that I'd have office hours.
So Ryan Ross has a question. Ryan, go ahead and ask it.
Ryan, ask away.
Yeah. So first of all, Dr. Barr, thank you very much. This was a wonderful talk. And I was kind of wondering what really stuck out to me. One of the things was the breaking a year up into 4 12-week periods. But then another thing that really stuck out to me was the BHAG. And I was wondering kind of how those two tie together and how, especially when communicating to your team, how you get them to focus on those kind of periods while keeping in mind the bigger goal that you're trying to accomplish.
Well, that's a really good question. And when Len was asking me about all those meetings, that's one of the reasons for all those meetings. So when you know your BHAG and you talk about it every quarter, everybody knows what it is and everybody knows what they're working toward. But you also need metrics. So data is also very important. You need KPIs or OKRs or whatever you want to, one or the other, they're not exactly the same. And once you have them, how do they match up with your BHAG? So everything has to be kind of like you're looking at the stars. You need to know exactly where you're going and everything kind of lines up. So if you can imagine this 11 by 14 one-page business plan, if you're going to create competencies that are going to get you to your 3 to 5 year plan, which one of those are you going to create this year? What are you going to concentrate on this quarter or this 12-week period? And then you create literally 5 priorities and you talk about them every week at your all hands meeting, even if there's 3 of you. You say, okay, your priority is funding. Where are we at? What are the challenges? Because if you wait to ask it a month later, I mean, what time have you lost? Too much time. So it's really important. I used to say, you know, I like to push the peanut forward every day. Now I'm saying I want to kick that soccer ball down the road every day. Right? So does that answer your question, Ryan?
Absolutely. No, thank you. That was a great answer.
Okay.
Yeah, Ellie.
Ellie.
Hi, Dr. Barr. Thank you for this wonderful meeting. And that was very informative. So especially now with COVID times, we noticed that like even if you have a BHAG, your team, your members know where you want to go. They know your big goals, so to speak. But sometimes when they see or you notice that some of your members are doubtful that those goals are attainable, they start losing track. Or if they hit, let's say, a roadblock, that can also affect their psychology somehow and their self-esteem. And especially now with COVID, like we're working remotely, so it's not like when you're in a setup in office, when you're stumbling onto something, you can ask someone to help you, support you, give you their perspective. Everyone kind of like is working on their own. So how do you deal with that? I mean, with that BHAG, like having the BHAG as a culture or as kind of like a roadmap that everyone knows about, how do you cope with that, especially nowadays?
Well, I would tell you that remote teams could be even more efficient than being in an office, but you have to start with an intentionality around it. So what does that mean? It means that a meeting isn't just a meeting. If you're having, let's say, an all hands meeting or a founder meeting, you have to take the time to allow people to share a highlight. What was the highlight of your week? A personal highlight or a business highlight. And you have to be more intentional of planning to incorporate that into your meetings. So if anybody, and I'll tell you a little story about having an attainable goal. First question is it attainable? Okay, so I was mentioning this Big 5 for Life thing. And one of the people said, one of my Big 5 for Life is not attainable. And so we asked her, what does that mean? And she said, well, I want to go to Tuscany in the summer and sit on the balcony of a villa and drink wine. But that's not attainable. What? So I started breaking it down into bite-sized pieces. Okay, so is there a place called Tuscany in the world, or is that some fantasy land? And she said, no, I went there with my parents. I know there's a Tuscany. Is there no summer? Is it like the Antarctic all year? She said, no, we went in the summer with my parents. I was 12 years old. So I took them down this ridiculous conversation. Are there villas in Tuscany? Are there balconies on villas in Tuscany? And finally, I get to the big dramatic thing. Oh, I know, there's no wine in Tuscany, right? And we all know that Tuscany is a big wine producing place. And so I could see the paradigm shift in her, because she realized that when I broke it down into small bites, of course it was attainable. So as the leader, if you have a goal, Brian, you're next. If you have a goal, break it down. It's up to you to be the inspiration. And that's why is important as well. Why are you there? So you have to keep reminding your people, your remote team, about their why. And if the goals feel unattainable, what do you need to pivot to? And a BHAG is supposed to be a big, hairy, audacious goal. It's supposed to be like really way out there. Okay? So Brian, you had something.
Yeah, I have 2 questions. One, who are you reading right now in the way of books in general? And then number 2, I have, at the beginning of this year, I decided I wanted to have my team set timelines for certain tasks, like literally saying, hey, these types of tasks should take me 30 minutes or 60 minutes or 90 minutes. And I've had a little reticence on some of their parts because, and my gut feeling is that they're worried that they're going to be setting themselves up for micromanagement maybe, but I'm wondering if maybe there's a technique that you have considered with regards to get employees to be more kind of self starters and setting their own timelines for tasks.
So Brian, I would suggest that you don't tell them how much time things should take. Just tell them what you expect from them. What does success look like? What are your expectations? Because one person might do it in 6 hours, another might do it in 10 hours, but what do you care? As long as they know what's expected. And also, when you tell them what your expectations are, also tell them to come to you if they have challenges, because it's your job as a leader to remove the challenges and the roadblocks. Okay. And that way, you'll create a very cohesive team. And I would also suggest that you use tools like Pat Lencioni's 5 Cohesive Behaviors of a Team to know just how cohesive your team is. Do you trust each other? Are you able to have constructive conflict? Do people make commitments? Are you accountable to each other? And finally, that's how you get results. And so, Brian, you asked me—
Can you repeat that thing that you just said? What was the 5 what?
The 5 cohesive behaviors of a team.
5 cohesive.
And feel free to reach out to me. I've written 160 book summaries. So you asking me, what book I'm reading is kind of funny because I'm always reading a book. But I can tell you that the book I'm listening to right now is by General Stanley McChrystal, who during the war with Iraq and Afghanistan used to run an all-hands meeting with 250 people. It was a team of teams. And he talks about in that book about the importance of being resilient and how the army was such a well-functioning machine, but it couldn't fight Al-Qaeda because they had a whole different way of working. So they had to learn how to be resilient and do things differently, which is amazing. And they did it like this in Zoom or something like Zoom. So don't underestimate the value of having a remote team and just what you can do, Ellie, if you're intentional about it. So we have 4 minutes left. Anything else, Len?
I'm good. I think anybody else have any questions? I won't put anybody on the spot. I want to thank everybody for being part of our program today, and stay tuned. We will be having our next seminar coming up on February 9th. And so check the schedule, and I look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you all.